She smiles just like the river, floating softly to the sea. And she floats away my problems. Helps to take a little weight off me. If she's happy, oh, you know I'm in heaven. And if she's sad, well, she ain't gonna say. 'Cause she knows I'm only treading water. Guess she thinks I'm better off that way. If the sadness overcomes me, I'm blinded by the night. Well, she takes my hand and leads me to the light, and whispers at the morning, such a sight to see. Well, she keeps me looking forward to a new day. So I'm happy just to be her lover. Oh, and I hope that she understands.
A good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome to Real Talk. Samuel G. Brooks, technical producer of this show. Am I putting you on the spot? I suspect you'll know the answer right off the top of your head or be able to reference it quickly. This is episode number...
Oh, I don't know, 70-something.
72?
Yeah.
Maybe we're in our early 70s, so to speak, episode-wise. Slowly approaching. We'll have to do like a 100th episode, some sort of a bash.
So, hey?
You know? Maybe a little something creamy in the coffee or something like that. We'll see how that goes. That'll be
like
coming
we've
up.
never done that before.
We actually really haven't. If you think about it,
Christmas and New Year's, I guess. But that's about it.
Yeah. We're 1 minute in, and we're already talking about boozy coffees on a Tuesday morning in the middle of March.
I see no problem with this.
It's so, yeah, not as much going on here. Not as much of a party atmosphere as people might think. I sort of thought when we set the tone out of the gates with the Real Talk beer fridge and everything else, the fact that we're untethered, that the shackles are off, that we can do whatever we want, that we'd be cracking cold ones at 8:30 Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern every weekday morning. But simply not the case. We've got to keep our focus. A great show coming up today. In about a half hour from now, we're going to check in with three physicians. It's a women's health roundtable. Yesterday, International Women's Day. Some are calling it International Women's Week. We're going to take a look at the launch of the Alberta Women's Health Foundation. They want you to refocus the research. We're going to learn where deficiencies are. Well, first of all, why does it matter? When it comes to medical research, why have women been underrepresented in the research process? Why does that matter to women? The answer might be obvious, but we don't take it for granted. And then what do they mean by refocus the research? I'll give you a hint. They're saying that there's a lot of research being done in women's health matters around things like, cosmetic surgeries and things like that, but maybe not enough on things like cancers. Now, I don't know. I haven't spoken to Dr. Sandra Davidge and Dr. Colleen Norris and Dr. Jane Schultz yet. That's coming up in a half hour, but we'll be getting into that Women's Health Roundtable. In just a moment, we'll talk to former Alberta Minister of Environment and Parks. She's now the official opposition's finance critic. She's the MLA, member of the Legislative Assembly out of Lethbridge West, Shannon Phillips. Yesterday, a bombshell reporting by Carolyn Dunn of the CBC, who's done a great job, a Freedom of Information request that was actually launched by MLA Phillips into herself. She wanted to see if suspicions that she had were in fact true. She felt like she was being surveilled, monitored by the Lethbridge Police Service, and she received back about 9,000 pages worth of redacted documents that show that appear to confirm that her suspicions were correct. So Shannon Phillips coming up in just a moment. Want to remind you that each and every morning these shows are brought to you by our presenting sponsor at Bitcoin Well. Whether or not you caught CEO Adam O'Brien's workshop over the weekend, he was taking questions, doing a live Q&A. You can still go back and watch it. Just check out the Adam O'Brien YouTube channel. He steers this team that continues to grow. They're getting set to move to 35,000 new square feet. I mean, just rapid expansion as cryptocurrency continues to boom. If you want to learn a bit more about it, like you're at starting point number one. Blockchain doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything to you, and crypto doesn't make any sense, and you can't figure out what on earth anybody's talking about. Go see the team at Bitcoin Well. They'll simplify it for you. I say it because they did it for me. You can find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Shannon Phillips is the MLA out of Lethbridge West. She suspected that something was going on with Lethbridge Police. She suspected, as a matter of fact, that she was being monitored. And so she put in a request just this past summer in August under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, known as FOIP, on herself, a request on herself and the Lethbridge Police. A couple of months later, she received more than 9,300 pages on a compact disc, all redacted. You know what that means, like blacked out big time. You could barely read anything. But what you could read is startling. In my opinion, it's damning, and it should be troubling to every single Canadian citizen. Shannon Phillips, the MLA out of Lethbridge West, joining us this morning. Thank you for making time for us, and welcome back to Real Talk.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
So this is, you had suspicions, we say, over the last 4 years or so that you were being monitored by police. What does that mean? What did that look like? When did this first start for you?
I don't know if I just kind of had a gut feeling that there might be more. I knew that obviously I had filed that 2017 complaint. And then I got back the results of that complaint, and the investigation was tremendously unsatisfying. But I kind of put it to the side. I was going into an election campaign. I just honestly didn't want to deal with it, so I never talked to the media about it. I never, I didn't even really talk to my colleagues about it. But I always felt like maybe there was more, because the investigation was so surface and the conclusions like mildly ridiculous in their vagueness, that I thought, you know what, I have to wonder.
Shannon, when you talk about the 2017 complaint, you're talking about the photos in the diner. Is that what you're talking about? Because I bet you some of our listeners aren't familiar with it. I mean, that on its own is wild. Can you bring us up to speed on that?
Yeah. So I go for breakfast on Good Friday of 2017 with some folks that were in town. I was supposed to have met with them the night before, or just like talked to them the night before at a U of L scholarship dinner, because one of the people was an honoree at that scholarship dinner. And so my flight got in late, and I was like, you know what, let's go for breakfast instead. The next day, I don't have kids. It's Good Friday. Let's do that. So we do. There's uniformed police officers behind me, and I acknowledge them. They acknowledge me. And later on, it turns out that there's photos all over Facebook of me with this really quite insane conspiratorial libelous screed about what I was talking about. It was all false. So I filed a police act complaint. Those photos were taken by in-uniform police officers, right? So I filed a complaint thinking that, LPS is just going to handle this. I sort of had maybe misplaced faith in the system, but I just thought, you know what, let's quietly make sure that we're not letting bad cops get away with discreditable conduct, but let's move on with our lives. And so that's what I did. I get the complaint back in 2018. The report is not very good. But I sort of set it aside. Fast forward to July of 2020. And that's when I hear about this next, that in 2018, there was another investigation that started that concerned me that I had no knowledge of. They didn't tell me, all of these guys have my cell phone number. They know where to find me. And there was a plan to follow me and engage in other discreditable conduct. And so those two officers were subsequently disciplined again because they were given a very light touch off the first complaint. And so after that, I just went, you know what? Well, first of all, I'm going to appeal this because there's no way that it is lawful that you can have a whole investigation about someone that they're not even told about for 2 years. But what else is there? How much more is there? And it turns out there was more. And, so like at a certain level, the LPS just really needs to get their act together and restore public trust, because that's what this is about.
We should probably point out that the Medicine Hat Police Service investigated that so-called spying incident in 2017, and that investigation also turned up the fact that one of those Lethbridge police officers that was in that diner at that time you were having brunch also followed, if my understanding and my interpretation of this Medicine Hat Police report is accurate, followed two of the guests that you were meeting with that morning, right? Environmentalist Harvey Locke and Marie-Eve Marchand in their vehicle for 5 blocks after they left the diner before he lost them at a red light. He also ran a search on their license plate. So not just you, the target of this, but also people that you were associating with.
Yeah, and in the investigation records, it's really clear. He said, I did this because I don't like her. I don't like the NDP. I don't like the government. I don't like the decisions she made. Like, those are the reasons he gave. So, I'm not filling in the blanks there. This is by his own admission. The reason given was, I don't like anything that she does. So I'm going to follow the people that she's with. So people in the community since then have said to me, well, should I not have coffee with my MLA in public? Should I be afraid to talk to my elected official because the cops might take photos of me and follow me and conduct an unlawful search?
Not even just that. But if this is the way that the police are operating, in that they're surveilling you on duty, taking photos of you, posting them to social media, following and potentially harassing and intimidating the people that you're meeting with, it's because they don't like you because you're representing the NDP. What if they don't like me because of my podcast? What if they don't like somebody because they're Jewish? What if they don't like somebody because they're black? What if they don't like somebody because they didn't donate to the police service? What if they don't like somebody because they're Oilers fans? What if they don't like somebody because they're vegetarians? Do you get the idea? I mean, if this is the criteria for how police can conduct themselves, this has nothing to do. I mean, it does have to do with politics, but this is a way bigger problem that should be troubling everybody today.
Well, that's exactly it, right? Like, we have guardrails in a liberal democracy. And one of the foundational ones is that the people who are elected make the decisions, not the people with guns. The people with guns take orders from the people who are elected and from and they implement the laws that are passed in a legislature or a parliament. That's the way the world works. And when you are moving through your duties as a police officer, it is the basics of your professional standards that you leave aside any of your other prejudices. They could not like you because you're their neighbor and you didn't paint your fence. That does not justify a breach of professional standards in this way. And that's why the 2017 complaint was bad. The investigation and the findings was terrible. The 2018 process was, well, according to the Law Enforcement Review Board anyway, flawed, tainted, grossly inadequate. That's what our Civilian Oversight Board said about it. So again, those aren't my words. So we'll be appealing that, my lawyer and I, but that's why this is such a problem. You've got these cops investigating cops, and they're allowed to get away with conclusions like that are, to be clear, grossly inadequate, tainted, flawed.
Yeah, I want to be clear myself in that we've extended an opportunity for the Lethbridge Police Chief to join me here on the show. With the lack of response there, we requested a statement. We received neither, but the door is open. Let's be clear. This is not the full and complete story. This is just the beginning. I mean, you received more than 9,300 pages worth of redacted documents that show that over the course of 11 months in 2018, your name was searched no fewer than 8 times by 5 different police officers, as well as 1 civilian employee. Were you shocked?
I was somewhat shocked. I think, I wasn't overly shocked. because there had just been so much discreditable conduct and just, I don't know if it's a mixture of like incompetence and malevolence, but and I don't know where one ends and the other begins, but I knew, like from my previous experience that there was probably more going on. And sure enough, there was, wherever there's a reason for one of the police officers to search, or open a certain record or search my name, like for example, when my car got stolen in 2017, that reason is there in the documents, right? Constable so-and-so did a search in association with investigation of theft of a stolen vehicle, right? But there is at least one record that is of a highly personal nature from something that occurred before I was elected, where there is no investigation, none of that happening, and that was the record that was opened many times by many different people with no law enforcement purpose listed, and one can only conclude that it was done for reasons of gossip, mischief making, just abusing their access to that data for political reasons.
Connor's watching this morning. He says 9,300 pages, 9,300 pages. I mean, Deborah puts it lightly, says this is a waste of police resources. It's time that should have been directed to more urgent matters. A waste of police resources is like responding to kids toilet papering evergreen trees. That's a waste of police resources. You don't call surveillance of elected officials a waste of police resources. That's scandalous. I mean, you know what this reminded me of? It reminded me of, he's now a member of parliament. Everybody knows the story of Kerry Diott, a former Edmonton Sun columnist who was unpopular at the time with the Edmonton Police Service, who set up a sting operation at the Overtime Bar. People can Google Kerry Diott Overtime. They suspected that he may drive impaired. An astute desker, we call them, a staffer on the Edmonton Sun's cop desk was listening to the scanner and heard Kerry Diott's name coming up and alerted him that he better be careful about this. And turns out that people paid for it with their jobs. Ultimately, the chief of police in Edmonton resigned. I mean, this to me invokes that story. What do you think would be an appropriate response here? I mean, are you expecting the chief to resign? We should note that the chief of police in Lethbridge was not the chief when this was happening.
Yeah, I don't want, honestly, Ryan, I don't want to presuppose outcomes of investigations. Like there's 2 Alberta Serious Incident Response Team investigations happening right now, and I want those to do what they need to do. Ultimately, Ryan, what I need here is for the system to work. I need accountability. I want transparency. I want restoration of trust, whatever that looks like. But what it doesn't look like, and what has been distressing in the, to put it charitably, to me, is the defensive posture of the LPS, of the, there's just this serial pattern of just not taking ownership over the very clear problems that happened here, it's no comment this, and it's making up reasons that, and, even the responsive documents in the Freedom of Information request, the reason was, it's too hard for us to search all the emails of everyone. Well, you know what? I was the Minister of Environment and brought in the carbon tax legislation. I can tell you that I was FOIP'd a lot. Probably some of the most FOIPs in the history of Alberta politics have been, directed at my department. And email searches are really straightforward, right? So this, these silly reasons that I was given by these people are not lawful. They're not consistent with common sense or how the Freedom of Information Act works. That's just one example. Like they just don't seem to fully appreciate the seriousness of it. What they need to do, the work that needs to get done to restore public trust, and that to me, I just need to see evidence of that as we go through these processes.
Yeah, I mean, you're being diplomatic, as you might expect from, an official opposition finance critic, former Minister of the Crown. But let me read you what people are saying that are watching us right now. Carla says, I have chills listening to this Real Talk interview with Shannon Phillips about police misconduct in Lethbridge. Double Duties watching says, do you think they have files maybe on everybody who displayed a Shannon Phillips sign last campaign? Says it feels like the enemy's in charge here and they've got the guns and the gavel. Mark Doran's watching. Mark is one of the founders of the Polluter Pay Federation. He's working to get Alberta's orphan wells figured out. He says, do you think, seriously, that surveillance on Shannon Phillips is unique or rare? Think again. That from Mark. So who else has police keeping an eye on him?
Well, I don't know. I would hope that this is rare. And I would hope now that, all of the good officers who are out there are watching this and saying, oh, actually, if I have a colleague who is, going to color outside the lines of well-established professional standards in a liberal democracy, that there should be consequences for that, because otherwise entire police forces are going to pay with their reputational damage. And that's not a good outcome. And that's why LPS needs to take this seriously. And it's unfortunate that they haven't from the beginning. I would hope that it is actually rare. And when you make reference to the Carrie Diot piece, again, these are people who, in my case and in that case, had access to resources. In the case of the media, it was access to a police scanner. For me, it was, staff who have had my back, people who have helped me out along the way. And, now that this is all rolling along, someone who has 20 years experience in Alberta politics knows how to use the Freedom of Information Act. So to the extent that it is not being caught, I think that's where there's space for Police Act reform. There's space for individual police services to really take a long look at how they conduct themselves and what's acceptable. And I think there's one other piece here. We've had this sort of shedding of the guardrails of a liberal democracy with extreme partisanship, and in particular polarized partisanship on the right, where it's everything is a war and everything, is an existential threat. And all of this just really heightened rhetoric. And in particular, what that does is that it puts women and others, in progressive politics, really in the crosshairs of some of that dangerous rhetoric. And I think institutions need to understand the threat that kind of turning up the dials of how we understand our interaction with political life, what kind of corrosive effect ultimately that has on our democracy. These guys, did this because they were radicalized by BS on Facebook. Right? Just like a steady stream of lies about what we were doing in Castle and vilifying me and just vile stuff. And that became normalized and created a permission structure for this garbage to happen. So I think everybody needs to understand here that we are in this time, and it does present certain challenges to democracy, to democratic engagement, to people, being active in civil society. There's lots of room for action there, right?
Yeah.
From all different levels of government and people.
You talk about what's going on in Castle. For the benefit of the people that aren't familiar, I want to point out that your government had done some work to protect the eastern slopes of the Rockies in Alberta. These two police officers at the diner in 2017, in an investigation, revealed that they were off-road enthusiasts. So am I, by the way. But they were off-road enthusiasts that had a real problem with what your government's plan was there. It started to make sense in the years to follow, and most especially just the past 6 months, maybe why Alberta's Conservatives were so intent on keeping that parkland from becoming official. And it's because they wanted to mine coal on the eastern slopes. And Albertans had something to say about it, and the government was forced to walk that one back. I also want to make a quick note that it's a story worth following, nothing to do with Lethbridge, but when we talk about accountability and police, Edmonton police, have moved their radio communications to an encrypted system. This was just a couple of months ago, locking out the public, locking out news media from tuning in through scanners. It's part of the Alberta First Responder radio communications system, and it's drawing mixed results, and people can Google that if they want to learn more. Shannon, I noticed that you, I don't know if I say praised, but you acknowledged Alberta's Justice Minister. You acknowledged Minister Casey Madhu and Ministers Doug Schweitzer as well for their response to this. What about, I mean, I saw that Minister Madhu stated that he was outraged yesterday. What do you expect to see from the government here? What impresses you about what they've been handling it to this point?
I don't know what they are going to do. And I spoke with Minister Madhu last night. And you know what, Ryan? I think there are some issues that don't fit as tidily within strict partisan lines. And I'm grateful that this is one of them, at least at this point. And, Minister Madhu phoned me. And, said very similar things to what he said in the media, which was that he was, going to make sure that the investigations follow. And that's the right thing. And I deeply appreciate that, just as I did Minister Doug Schweitzer's quick action in July when the first story came to light. And you know what? The Premier himself also expressed his support. And I'm grateful for that too. There are some things that we leave aside, our relative views on how we, tax people and what kind of services we provide them for that. Those are legitimate disagreements. My constituents elected me, to bring a certain perspective, and there's the same thing for them. But at base, our constituents elected us to make decisions. And that's the system we have. And they recognize that we need to be able to undertake those duties without interference by people with a gun and a bat. And I recognize that too. We shouldn't have to say it, Ryan. It's sort of just crazy to me that we live in this time where we actually have to say those words out loud. That you're elected to do a job, and nobody can intimidate you from doing that job. But that's the point we're at in our democratic life. So if I can take those points of convergence with, the UCP government, with whom I disagree on any number of topics, I will acknowledge it, I will appreciate it, and I will express my public gratitude.
We've got some listeners here this morning that are tuned in live, including on our Mixlr live streaming app, suggesting that there's an issue, a bigger issue here at play with the Lethbridge Police Service. Now, I'm going to list off some issues here. Now, I'll recognize there are hundreds of officers down there that respond to hundreds of calls every week, and I'm sure that some of them do a great job. I guess what I'm saying is not all officers. However, there are allegations that police reports have been collected in a duty that did not fit the diligence of what you would expect for a police officer around the cancellation of funding for Lethbridge's supervised consumption site, Arches. The head of Lethbridge Police's domestic violence team has recently stepped down as a result of allegations around an unwanted sexual relationship with a client. Lethbridge police officers just a short time ago took down and violently arrested a restaurant worker who on May 4th, for May the 4th be with you, at a Star Wars-themed restaurant was wearing a stormtrooper costume. A Lethbridge police officer was criticized by the public and investigated after running over a deer 6 times with his police cruiser in an attempt to kill it. I mean, what the hell is going on with the Lethbridge Police Service? This is your hometown.
Well, that's a question for them to answer and to take seriously, and that's
why
you're
an elected official, and this is your city. I mean, that's not, it's your problem too.
Yeah, it is my problem. And, quite frankly, as I have said, both publicly and privately to a number of folks in the community, look, I am tired of these kinds of stories. I pay property taxes too. And I am not interested in this kind of just continual barrage of embarrassing headlines, because ultimately it has an effect on public safety, right? If you can't trust the law enforcement officials, then that's going to chip away at the foundation of trust. So, they need to take this seriously. I think that there's a serious reckoning at the police commission that has to happen as a first instance. And I think the minister's meeting with them today, so that's good. I think that, ultimately we do need better civilian oversight. That's a matter for Police Act reform. And, that again is one of these non-controversial things that I think all parties share. It depends on how far various parties go, but I think there's a general consensus that needs to happen. I think so there's style points here and there's substance, right? And so on the substance, we need to make sure that ACERT investigations aren't just like, oh, whatever, right? And there's a shrug and a walk away, because that has happened in the past. And I don't think it's going to happen in this case. And I've spoken to ACERT, and I think they're going to take this seriously. So there's that.
They better.
There's then there's the style points. And, not to be a figure skating judge about this, but the LPS has failed on that at every single opportunity, right? Where they were kind of given an opportunity to either take more action or say, no, that disciplinary action wasn't good enough, or, yes, Phillips, you should appeal this to the Law Enforcement Review Board. They didn't do any of that. They haven't said, okay, actually, this dates back, since before my time. So we're going to, use whatever tools we have in the Act to have a more fulsome inquiry, or even respond to media requests. And that's what I'm a little sick of, is the serial bungling of this from a straight communications perspective, because that is the biggest thing that goes to public trust. And that's the thing that annoys, citizens across the city. And I'm going to assume Lethbridge police officers themselves, right? The vast majority of whom are grinding away at a tough job every day. They're my constituents too. And I want people to trust them, and I want them to be safe when they do their jobs. And I want them to, have the resources that they need to, go prosecute bad guys. That's what I want ultimately out of my police service that I pay for, and everyone else does as well. And when they can't just seem to communicate their way out of a paper bag, that's what, at the very first instance, that's a low to no cost solution that they can undertake. And then they can start thinking about what their substantive response to some of this is.
You are the NDP's finance critic, and I happen to know that there's a committee meeting that is beginning literally right now, and you're leading the charge on that. So I got to let you go. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
That's Shannon Phillips. She's the MLA out of Lethbridge West, literally from this interview right into a committee meeting. We appreciate her exclusive availability here on Real Talk. This is where you're going to find these kinds of interviews. Karen, using the hashtag Real Talk RJ, that's what we keep an eye on Twitter, says, I'm pretty sure that Black and Indigenous people already know how this feels. Coot Scoot. Coot Scoot and Boogie says, Jesso, this makes me wonder if I'm in police files, am I? Because I've met Shannon at her office. This is definitely an abuse of power. So who can actually impartially investigate this? Albertans will hope that ACERT, the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, will respond to this in a fashion that we would expect, which would be with integrity. Scott's written in talk at ryanjesperson.com, says this case with the Lethbridge Police Service and MLA Phillips is very troubling. Scott says, I myself grew up in the city of Saskatoon, and I know that while not all police are bad, obviously, some see no problem taking the law into their own hands to get the results they want. He says, I'm talking specifically about the Starlight tours in the 1990s. This from Scott. We've talked about this on the show before. If you're wondering what a Starlight tour is, Google Starlight Tour Saskatoon and brace yourself to be emotionally devastated. Scott says that situation only became resolved when officers within the Saskatoon Police Department had the courage to come forward to try to do something about what was happening. And not long after that, the chief resigned, a new mayor was elected, and public faith in the police was eventually restored. These Lethbridge officers had access to a citizen's private data and used it because they didn't agree with government policy. What if the Calgary Police did this to Premier Kenney, or the Edmonton Police to former Premier Rachel Notley? There was a similar case decades ago, Ryan, when the Edmonton Police, here it is, came after columnist Carrie Diot. Police cannot and should not be allowed to do this and expect to still hold on to their job. It is in the public interest to fire both of these officers, perhaps the chief as well, for not doing his job, which is to serve and protect the people of Lethbridge. Chief's not getting fired, I'll tell you that much. Scott says, Shannon has to be one of the bravest people I've known for holding these officers to task, demanding justice for their actions. Most people may have walked away, but she deserves our respect for having the courage to keep going on this. He's obviously a fan. He goes on to say, I don't know what we did to deserve Shannon, but I hope she stays in Alberta because every day she's here, she makes Alberta a better place for everybody that lives here. That from Scott, who's a fan. Our live chat's been going off on this. I mean, this is, Whitestream says, mayors across Alberta should be calling for investigations as well. They should make it clear these acts are not allowed in any community in the province. This is, yes, about Shannon Phillips and the Lethbridge police officers, but it's about a bigger issue, right? Number one, I mean, how many times have we seen stories? I mean, you can Google them. They've happened here in Alberta. They've happened across Canada. They happen around the world. Police officers, for example, or people that work as 911 dispatchers or people with access to these systems, maybe a jaded ex, right? Maybe having a difficult time saying goodbye and so long and I won't call you anymore to a former girlfriend or a former boyfriend. Surveillance, intimidation, these things do happen. Now, someone's going to write in and say, my wife's a police officer and she would never do that. Or my boyfriend, my brother's a cop. He's wonderful. He took a bullet for somebody one time. Yeah, absolutely 100%. If I'm a police officer, I'm troubled and outraged by this. Nobody should be more pissed off about this than Lethbridge police officers. I am surprised and I'm not surprised that the police chief in Lethbridge declined, at least to this point, our request for an interview. I would love to speak to him about this. If I'm him, I want to get ahead of this story, but I would imagine he's going to say he's going to let the investigation play out before he comments on this. As a matter of fact, if you read Carolyn Dunn's excellent reporting for the CBC, Carolyn's the one that broke this story yesterday. The Lethbridge Police Service has been, in a way, and I don't use the word lightly, but intimidating or attempting to intimidate the CBC. Telling the CBC that quote, this is Lethbridge Police Service Chief Medizeda says it would be, quote, improper for any staff members of the police service to comment publicly while an investigation is ongoing. He says it would also be highly improper for the CBC to report any conclusions about who did or did not conduct a database search without investigative purpose until the ACERT investigation properly has run its course. CBC's got good lawyers. Others say, Stephanie says this is absolutely appalling. This is disgusting behavior. This is a breach of public trust. Erica says there needs to be tighter oversight on police, but not by civilians. Erica says, after all, you wouldn't want some random civilians to decide if a doctor botched your surgery, would you? That from Erica. I mean, police commissions are made up of civilians, worth pointing out, but I can also take Erica's point. Two Beaver says, they spend millions following Indigenous people around. Everybody seems to be okay with that. What's the difference? Cindy Blackstock says Two Beaver is the most glaring example. Mark says current chief should fire the officers involved. They can no longer be trusted with the private data of citizens. I don't know how, in particular, I'm not even talking about the 11 months, the minimum of 8 different data searches into private matters involving Shannon Phillips. I'm not even touching on that. That's a huge problem. Huge problem, right? But those 2 officers in the diner, in uniform, on duty, snapping photos of Shannon Phillips in the diner, sharing them by text message, posting them to a Facebook page, and Shannon says misrepresenting the subject matter of the conversation. The officers said that they were there discussing this Castle Park plan, the provincial park plan, in uniform. How do you keep your job? How on earth do you keep your job? You trust those guys? I mean, me speaking about it, should I worry about it? I mean, how many of you right now are sitting here going, do I need to FOIP my name? Do I need to do a Freedom of Information request on my name? Right? You might be watching saying, I donated to Greenpeace or I opposed the coal mining in the Rockies or, I voted for the Alberta Party. Like, do I need to worry that I'm under surveillance? This, I get the sense, because this is not a naive group of fools that gathers here every day, is it, on this show? This is a pretty woke, pretty savvy audience. How many of you believe that this is the full story right now, that Shannon Phillips is the only individual being surveilled by just that one police department and nobody else has anything else to worry about? Not me. You can let me know what you think. Talk@ryanjesperson.com is the best way to get in touch with us to make sure we'll see your email. Real Talk RJ is our hashtag on Twitter. And, of course, our live chat is always churning through our live broadcast starting at 10:30 Eastern, 8:30 Mountain Time. We're going to talk women's health in just a moment. Wanted to remind you that the team at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge right now is boasting not just the best selection of the 2021 Jeep lineup at both of their locations, including this Grand Cherokee L that's coming out. That's the third row, the 7-seater, plus that Grand Wagoneer that everybody's talking about. They're taking on Navigator and Escalade and the Mercedes, the X5, the Beamer. Like, they're taking all those luxury brands head on with this beautiful Jeep. But they've also got the best selection of Dodge Ram 1500 pickups in the province. Go see Scott and his team. Some great financing options, including 0% on approved credit at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. The team at Kubi Energy, you're going to meet Jake. He's the founder of Kubi Energy. He's joining us on Friday for our solar panel. That's going to be a great conversation starting at 11 Eastern, 9 Mountain. Kubi Energy is Tesla certified. They employ certified electricians and apprentices to make sure that your install job is done right. Plus, they handle all your paperwork. You know, on commercial installs in the province of Alberta right now, there's a great government incentive. Talk to the team at Kubi Energy under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. They can help you sort that one out. Also wanted to give a shout out to the team at Clean Air Club this morning. How do you save money and breathe easy at the same time? Well, simple. You go to cleanairclub.ca, you check out the size of furnace filter you need. It's stamped right on the side of your furnace, right? That cardboard filter that pulls out, just get those numbers. You punch it in on their website. They deliver the furnace filter replacements to your door. Next thing you know, you've done your family a favor. Plus, you'll pay less than you would in store at cleanairclub.ca. Now, Sam, we may not be crushing beers or having, boozy, creamy coffees this morning, but we still can do whatever we want. And so I'm going to make an executive decision and blow through our newscast because I suspect that we have 3 guests that are locked and loaded, ready to go.
Correctly. Let's bring them in, shall we?
You got it. Samuel G. Brooks. Sam is steering the ship here on Real Talk as we say good morning to Dr. Sandra Davidge, Executive Director of the Women and Children's Health Research Institute, Dr. Colleen Norris, who's a professor and a clinician scientist at the U of A's faculties of Nursing, Medicine, and School of Public Health, and Dr. Jane Schultz, who's a professor in the U of A's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Yesterday, launching AlbertaWomen'sHealthFoundation.org, the Alberta Women's Health Foundation. Doctors, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to encourage the 3 of you to speak freely, to interact with one another. You don't have to wait for me to ask you questions. Dr. Davidge, why don't we start with you? Yesterday, International Women's Day. Many are observing International Women's Week. In the context of women's health, where do we need to begin our conversation?
That is great, but I feel like my internet is slow. How am I?
No, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so Alberta Women's Health Foundation just launched an amazing activity that we're doing here in Alberta. Women's health is needed, women's health research. We need to close the gap. We have gaps in knowledge, gaps in advocacy, and Alberta is in the forefront. And the launch of the Alberta Women's Health Foundation just puts us right in place to be able to do more for women's health.
Dr. Norris, a big part of this, and I've been keeping an eye on the hashtag. I refer people to refocus the research. Now, I'm sure we could do an hour just on this, but what's the premise of that message of refocusing the research?
Refocusing it on women because traditionally women don't participate in clinical trials. And I don't know if people know that when we set up guidelines for how to care for you, it's based on all the research that's been done ahead of that, clinical trials that have been done. And if women aren't participating in it, then we actually don't know if the treatment works for women. And that goes for medications, it goes for medical devices. We've just never included women in the research that's going on. So refocusing is saying, okay, we have to, I do women's heart health research, and we had hashtag time to see red. It's time to say, wake up and smell the roses. We need to start including women in the trials, in the treatment, in decisions about what's going on with their health, because they've just traditionally been left out of the picture.
Dr. Schultz, why do you think that is? Is it that there's been a lack of awareness? Is there been a lack of representation in the field of researchers, or is it that the funding isn't directed there? Or, I mean, are we able to pinpoint why we're at this point now?
So it's a number of factors. Women tend to be underrepresented in clinical trials. So women are busy. Women are mothers, they're working women, they are caring potentially for families. So access to research becomes a challenge because they cannot necessarily even get in to do the trial visits. Women have only been included in research studies in the last 3 decades. And before that, it was primarily focused on men. So women are underrepresented in trials. And then we look at our Indigenous and marginalized populations that potentially are completely excluded. So we know that those groups are definitely underrepresented in research. And the thing is, research drives innovation and changes in clinical care. So we don't just make stuff up and practice it in clinical practice, right? We go based on the evidence that has been provided in research trials. And then with COVID, we've seen increased reductions in access to care. So this new Alberta Women's Health Foundation and the Canadian collaboration we have, and also our Women's and Children's Health Research Institute, are supporting research for women and driving innovations in clinical care, which is huge for all the women of our province.
Doctors, I want to read a thread from Twitter here, and then I'll ask you to respond to it. This is from Maximum Jill on Twitter, who I know has been really proud to be working on the launch of the Alberta Women's Health Foundation. She says, for most of medicine's history, studies on the human body were done exclusively on men. Even today, only 8% of Canadian health research funding is done specifically on women's health. 8%. She says, basically, our health system has been studying men and then painting women with the same brush. Jill says it takes about 17 years for research to reach the patient population. Women have only been included in health research studies for about the last 20 years. 20 years. And she says the consequences of this inequity are grim. 75% of all adverse drug reactions happen to women. That was news to me. She says every year in Alberta, 300 women are sent home from the ER. 300, like 5 or 6 a week, one a day, only to come back having a heart attack because our heart attacks look different than men's heart attacks. She says 70% of patients with medically unexplained symptoms are women. Most mental health therapy is based on men, when women are more likely to have depression. Women are more likely to die prematurely from largely preventable illnesses like lung or cervical cancer. She says, in conclusion, it's no exaggeration to say we die because of inequity in women's health research. And like other inequities, it's even worse for Black and Indigenous people of color and trans women. Dr. Davidge, is that pretty bang on? Is that pretty accurate?
It is. That was amazing summary of everything that we've been talking about. There's a few things I'd like to point out. There's both unique and distinct needs for women. The uniqueness is the ovarian cancer, reproductive, pregnancy history can all have an impact on later chronic disease. So when you think of pregnancy, that's very specific to women, reproductive, but it's not just the 9 months. It's also the effect of pregnancy complication later in life. We have 52,000 births in this province. 10% or up to 20% could be complicated by gestational diabetes or preeclampsia, dire conditions of pregnancy. But this can impact a woman's health later in life. It also can affect a child and the development of those children. And not to give a plug for the Women and Children's Health Research Institute, but we are able to look at research across the spectrum because of the partnership between the Alberta Women's Health Foundation that was launched yesterday and the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation, which are a partnership with the University of Alberta and Alberta Health Services. So we are so well positioned in this province to really do more about our women and children in the province. I'd also like to say one more thing is that this is a trickle forward effect. So it's a ripple effect, if you want to put it that way, in that healthier mothers, healthier children, healthier communities So it impacts the whole. So when we talk about women's health, it is about families. It's about men too, so the more we can understand about the differences, the more we can really do better by both sexes. So I think this is a win-win for everybody that we focus on women's health.
Hey, and by the way, Dr. Davidge, I just want to release yourself from any. You say not to plug the Alberta Women's Health Foundation. You plug it all you like. You've got a captive audience here that I'm sure would love to learn more about it. Dr. Norris, I happen to know that you've published more than 300 papers in the areas of sex and gender differences in cardiovascular treatment and outcomes. You're an expert in women's heart health. I was surprised to hear that, and I didn't know this, that women's heart attacks can look very different, or at least maybe the symptoms of them or the red flags different than men's. There's a bunch of women that are going to be listening to this podcast, a bunch of women watching right now. What do we need to know about that?
So that's the most important message, actually, about women's heart health, and the message that we're trying to get out there. And it's the fact that women present differently. And earlier it said 300. You mentioned the fact that 300 women are coming into emergency departments and being sent home and then coming back. Actually, that's within 30 days. That's not within 30 days. They're coming back having had a heart attack. And so it's a real gap, and it's likely related to the fact that women do present differently. And there's a really good video that anyone can look at with Elizabeth Banks, where she's having a heart attack, and she's getting ready for breakfast and she's getting her kids ready for school. And she says, I keep getting hotter and hotter. And to go back to those symptoms, we're talking about things like women don't typically they have chest discomfort, but they don't have that Hollywood heart attack, elephant sitting on my chest. Sweating, nausea. The most interesting to me was the research that was done that said that the women that had a heart attack the month prior had such unusual fatigue that they thought something's wrong. Like when you're making the bed, you have to sit down and take a breath and say, I am exhausted. So that's really an unusual presentation sign. But the thing about all these signs, lightheadedness, nausea, there's women that had thought they had the flu, went to bed, and then went back to their doctor and found out that they'd had a heart attack. So the thing about these symptoms that women, I think, need to pay attention to is that they come on. Like say you've always hiked, you've always walked around your block, or you've always walked around in your neighborhood, but now you're getting short of breath when you're doing it. And you're thinking, oh, maybe I got a cold, or maybe in this time, maybe it's COVID related. But ultimately it's that change, right? Like there's something's not right. And, I think any woman will tell you they know their bodies better than anyone else. And so that if I am presenting to the emergency department and I'm saying, something's really not wrong, and here's what I'm experiencing. We had a Go Red campaign on February 13th across Canada, and it's to tell women that don't let them send you home. Say, would you check my heart, please? I think there's something going on. There's something wrong, and not to just be told, well, maybe it's your stomach, maybe it's a panic attack, which are typically the things that women are diagnosed with when they're sent home. They either have a thing called GERD, or suggest they have GERD, or abdominal issues, or stomach issues, or the other is you're having panic attacks or anxiety issues, and you should go see your family practitioner about this. So it's making women aware that they're their best advocates. If you say, you know what, I really want you to check this out. And actually, as mentioned, it's not just the women, it's the men being aware that this could happen as well. Interesting that I was taking care of 3 women. This has really sparked my interest a couple of years ago, taking care of 3 women that were in the cardiovascular ICU. And they were 52, 52, and 54 years of age. All 3 had had massive heart attacks at home. They had all been to the emergency department. 2 of them had been there twice. 1 had been there 3 times. They'd been sent home from the emergency department. And as a result, they ended up having this heart attack at home. But when you looked at these women, they weren't overweight. They were not smokers. They'd been physically fit. They were following all the rules. And we're starting to discover that women have different, just because we've never done the tests, women have different types of heart disease than men do. They don't have obstructive heart disease, where a blood clot or something breaks away and blocks the arteries in your heart. Women actually have disease underneath in the smaller vessels of the heart that we can't see with the diagnostic tools that we have right now. So anyways, these three women, one of the husbands had taken CPR because his father had had heart issues. So he had taken a CPR course, and he actually saved his wife's life when she fell in the bathroom, and he went in there and found that she'd had a myocardial infarction. So it's just important that the men are recognizing that this is going on.
And just to clarify, you're talking about women in their early 50s.
Oh yeah. Like, we did a study of women under 55 who, men and women under 55 who had heart attacks. And it's there, it's happening.
So is this a bigger picture around, and maybe Dr. Schultz, I'll ask you, but I'm sure that all of you could comment on this. Is this an issue of physicians? I mean, so there's a lack of research here, or a lack of meaningful or focused research anyway, which probably is the root cause here, and that's great in the sense that it's identifiable and we can make an impact, and that's what this campaign aims to do, to refocus the research. But what about the education of specialists, cardiologists and neurologists and endocrinologists, and what about people in intake? What about people managing triage? How much? As we look through the whole healthcare system, are there issues that need to be corrected essentially every step of the way?
Yeah, so education is a huge piece of this. So it's education of the public and the women themselves. It's education of families. It's education of the healthcare providers. So because of the deficiencies in women's health research, we're, like Dr. Norris alluded to, we're not aware of some of the answers, and there are different diagnostic tests that need to be done in this population. And the research will certainly drive that and provide new standards of care. But the other thing is that in terms of women's health provision and providing our future generations, so one of my roles is I'm the interim department chair for the Academic Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Alberta Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. So we're teaching future providers. We train all our future obstetrician gynecologists. We're training our future family physicians. We train emergency physicians in women's health. And there's certainly lesser focus sometimes on women's health, or lesser funding of education of women's health. There are some inequities in the programs and teaching. There are challenges related to educating your future health providers. So, we have, as Dr. Davidge alluded to, there's 52,000 deliveries in the province. There is almost 20,000 in Edmonton. And COVID has definitely impacted and disrupted some of that in terms of educating our future providers. It's disrupted training. So those are certainly a concern. But we have some amazing programs at the Lois Hole Hospital for Women. We have subspecialty programs. We have our high-risk obstetrics and gynecology clinic with our maternal fetal medicine group that are doing studies on COVID care and other prenatal disorders. That group interact very closely with Dr. Davidge's research group and some of the basic scientists at the university looking at preterm labor, high-risk pregnancies, hypertension. And as Dr. Davidge alluded to, many of these conditions affect the future health of women and even their offspring. We have special diabetes in pregnancy clinics. So we have a group of obstetrical medicine providers at the ALEC. We have a pelvic floor clinic for mature women's health, where we look after women with their pelvic floor disorders. So 1 in 3 women will have a pelvic floor disorder after having had kids. So they may pee their pants, poop their pants, have vaginal prolapse. So we have a multidisciplinary clinic at the Lois Hole Hospital for Women that provides care for that. We have a menopause clinic, pelvic pain clinic. We have our gynecologic cancer specialists. So it's a huge team that all work together. And these platforms, such as the Alberta Women's Health Foundation and the Women's and Children's Health Research Institute, help provide that network of collaboration, both for research and education of these providers. Our foundation's also been profoundly generous at the Lois Hole Hospital, having provided a simulation center where we can train future providers. And this includes both our medical students and our obstetrics and gynecology trainees. We have a simulation center where you can actually deliver a baby and practice like shoulder dystocia or breech, and that has all been funded through our foundation. There are educational research projects looking at best modalities for providing future education. We have simulation labs at the university as well. So we're really well positioned, but we definitely need the resources to see the best ways to move forward and provide this ongoing care for women as we move ahead with the network.
Dr. Schultz, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that really came to mind when Jane was talking is that all of the foundations are supported by women in the community, and that those women, I presented to the Alberta Women's Health Foundation the other night on women's heart health, and the questions that they raise actually direct not just the researchers, but the clinicians, because they're saying, this happened to me, and I'll sit there and say, how is that possible that happened? Okay, we need to follow that up. We need to see if that's happening all the time. You start hearing about people that have been turned away from the emergency, like this was a few years ago, turned away from the emergency, and you're saying, how is that possible? So these women are so helpful in directing where this is all going. And one of the studies we did that just blew me away when I'm speaking about women and being partners in research is, and this was supported by WICRI, is we had tables, focus groups of women who had a heart event of some kind and now were living with heart disease. And it was the first time I was sitting listening to the focus groups, and we were asking them questions, they were responding, and then it came up that one of them said, I was really embarrassed that I had heart disease, because the word on the street is, if you have it, it's your fault. You didn't take care of yourself. You didn't walk enough. You're overweight. You drink too much. So that it's sort of under the table. They're not telling anyone that they have heart disease, which is just absolutely crazy, especially when we're looking at the younger women who have it that don't have any of the traditional risk factors. Like I said, those 3 women I took care of, not smokers, not drinkers, so that the women, it was the first time for me as a researcher where I thought, oh, okay, well, we're directing all our messages, but we've got to really pay attention to what these women are saying. They're telling us that they don't have the social network in order to get better and to get the support they need.
Dr. Norris, I'll never forget talking to someone, just so happened to be a woman. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but she's bravely fighting lung cancer. And it struck me in the course of the conversation, I don't want to speak on her behalf. She's very candid. And it struck me that she was more concerned that people were going to think she was a smoker and that she got lung cancer from smoking than she was with the fact that she had lung cancer. I mean, I'm being facetious to a certain degree. But it was like she was ashamed of the type of cancer that that she had been, the cards she had been dealt.
Oh, totally. Like, think of it yourself. Like, it just, that's part of our healthcare system. I mean, even I'm always holding back when I'm saying, how do you make sure you're taking care of your heart? Well, stay active and maintain a healthy diet. Another anecdote about this is that Royal Alec Hospital has this wonderful clinic for postpartum women who had eclampsia, which is part of the high blood pressure issues, and they have protein in their urine. It's not good, is what it is. And this woman had agreed to be part of a clinical trial, and they had this incredible clinic for women where they are part of a clinical trial, but they also have access to nutrition and physiotherapy and a psychology, postpartum psychology care. And I was at the clinic just watching, and they also have obstetricians, gynecologists, all the healthcare needs that you would have. And they have a problem with women coming to clinic, even though they've signed up for the trial. And while I was there, the phone rang, and it was this woman, and you could hear the baby crying in the back. And she said, I've been driving around this effing parking lot for 2 hours and I'm going home. And I thought, okay, there again is the woman directing us. If we are going to do this care, we need to figure out how we do it in the community. Because have you ever tried to park at the Royal Alec Hospital? Like I have. It's not possible. So, paying attention to the issues that this now is a mother at home with a new infant, and how do we work around that as far as research is concerned, and as with all of the stuff that we can bring to the table, those people are bringing more to the table to us to help direct research for women. That's Dr. Colleen Norris, also joined by Drs. Jane Schultz and Sandra Davidge. I want to get to, the live chat here, the viewers, the listeners this morning, very engaged in this. I can't wait till the podcast lands, because people are going to, I know, find great value in this conversation. Greg says, I'm so happy we're having this conversation. He says, these are common discussions that my partner and I have, which, by the way, is a great thing that they're talking about this, right? But let me just read some of these comments. And doctors, I'll ask you to pick some out that especially intrigue you. Deborah says, this is a really interesting chat, because I was just reading that women were having more reactions to the COVID vaccine than men. I don't know if that's true, but Deborah notes that. Terry says, as a woman, I'm treated far differently than male patients with similar complaints when I attend a walk-in clinic or when I access an ER. Others say, Heidi says, pelvic floor health is such a concern for women that I think it's just starting to become acceptable to talk about. So many women take it for granted that you pee your pants after childbirth, and it's not okay, right?
There's a huge stigma around that. So, that's that's my subspecialty area of interest. And we've done studies looking at patients' knowledge and access to care. And certainly our minority and immigrant population have challenges particularly, but there is a stigma associated with this. It's interesting. We've done a lot of work with the foundation, and each year we have a harvest celebration to raise money for the Lois Hole Hospital for Women. And it's done in conjunction with the foundation, and we feature a different thing each year. So we featured recurrent pregnancy loss, fertility issues, cancer, mental health, high-risk pregnancy, all these types of things. And in most of those circumstances, we've been able to have a patient that has very generously and kindly come forward and told their story, because stories are what matters. It's the stories of these women and how they're affected and how it impacts their life. But for the pelvic floor one, we actually were not even able to get anyone that would come forward to be part of that video campaign. We had to hire an actress, because no one will come forward and say, I'm peeing my pants, my vagina is hanging out. And this then has massive impact, because it impacts their ability to work, it impacts their ability to care for their families. And again, this is work and research that has been supported both by the foundation and by the Women's and Children's Health Research Institute. And we have a great multidisciplinary team that works here. So there are a lot of these taboo topics. Mental health is another one. We've seen a lot of challenges with mental health, especially related to the pandemic, of women being isolated at home, isolated with their newborns, issues with anxiety, issues with depression. We do have the access 24/7 for mental health, but mental health is certainly underfunded, and there's many areas that we could look at improving. There are issues with the opioid crisis and with domestic violence, especially with women being at home and having to work at home. So there's a huge range of issues that need to be looked at, and we can definitely do better.
I'd like to jump in there if I could, just Absolutely. Real briefly. About the pelvic floor issues. It's hard to get funding on a federal level for things like affecting lifestyle and care. So usually it's life and death. And that's where the foundation, Alberta Women's Health Foundation, the fact that we have people in the community supporting research, it's really incredibly important, but may not get funded at a federal level. So it's just an amazing like I said, being in Edmonton allows for women to have the best care at the site of care, because we have a strong research institute here able to support that.
Laura's watching this morning, and she touches. We talked just yesterday about period poverty and advocacy around more awareness of menstrual issues, and yeah, it was in the context of providing hygiene products for women, but we can expand that conversation. Laura writes in about premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD, and she says that so many women spend so much time suffering and spend years fighting to be heard on this. I've got another comment, it's sort of a recurring comment that, Sandra here, I'll put it in her words, says, a lot of ER doctors don't seem to give women credit for knowing their own bodies. Tracy says, I have a friend that had an abnormal pap when she had her baby. She was never notified. She found out 3 years later she had stage 3B cervical cancer, now is in stage 4B. She's 32 years of age. I mean, that's just an absolutely devastating story. So people are going to be watching this and going, okay, like obviously we're getting a lot of information here from you three. This is fascinating. Other people are going to go bigger picture. What can we do here? Well, if we need to refocus the research, if we need to improve messaging or more of a focus on women's health, what would be the call to action to the average civilian that doesn't have postdoctoral research work under their belt?
So I was at the launch of the Alberta Women's Health Foundation yesterday, and they are putting up videos that actually, they're really going to hit strongly, because it's a video of a picture of a woman, but they've actually peeled away part of the skin to look underneath, and it's the idea is that we're not men. The idea is for women to start recognizing that we aren't little men or smaller men, and that that's the key message, is that you are different. You are not, don't fall necessarily into all of what we know so far. And it's so important that I sound like a broken record, that people start to advocate for themselves, because you hear women that have gone into the emergency department and been turned down, and like those 3 women I spoke about 2 and 3 times. And so it's time to see red and time to say, no, I'm not leaving here. Sort of like when McDonald's used to say, could you go wait in line and we'll bring you your delivery out in the parking lot? And my husband would say, no, I'm staying right here. You can just deliver it to my window. So it's just putting your feet down and saying, no, I'm staying here, and I need to get some answers.
And I'd like to follow up on that just briefly. That research, refocus the research as an Albertan, as total Alberta. It's the whole province, and then they're working, the Alberta Women's Health Foundation is working with their sister foundations across with BC and Ontario. So we're going to get the messaging out Canadian-wide. So it is about messaging, advocacy, and supporting research for the best healthcare. So this launch is more than just, hey, here's Alberta Women's Health Foundation. It really does span the whole province. And there are provincial chair. They do support a provincial chair in women's mental health. And this is really going to be an important area by which we are looking at it provincial-wide, but also Canadian-wide and beyond. Our researchers focus beyond the borders of Canada as well.
Laurel,
I think women
go ahead,
can advocate for them. I mean, as Colleen said, women can advocate for themselves, but also their family members or their spouses or their partners can also help advocate for them. So as Colleen has said, women know their bodies. So if you think something's wrong and you're not getting answers, then push to get answers, or their spouse or partner or family member can also help advocate for them. I think education is a huge piece of this, and certainly opportunities to spread the word, and so advocacy, access for minorities and marginalized populations, and education is a huge key component.
I've got Scott's watching this morning on Twitter. He hits me up. He says, I first learned about some of these discrepancies relating to women's health a couple of years ago when the 99% Invisible podcast did an episode on Caroline Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. Looks like at least one of you has read that book. He says it was totally mind-blowing and well worth a listen. Dr. Norris, have you read it?
Oh, listen, it's my Bible. I've got it sitting right here. It's just incredible because it talks about sex and gender, and I also do sex and gender science. And just for clarification, sex is the biology. So your chromosomes and female and male biological issues, but gender is something different. And gender isn't just sexual orientation. Gender is your gender roles and institutionalized gender, which is what the book talks a lot about. And so those gendered issues actually have come to the forefront during the COVID era as well, because women who are the caregivers and women who are working in the service industry have all been hit harder than anyone else in COVID. And so it's really brought those to the forefront. But we did a really cool study on this I was mentioning people who had heart attacks under 55, and this was done across Canada. And we measured all these gendered issues. How many kids do you have? What's your income? What's your education? Which are gendered issues. And we discovered that regardless if you were a male or a female, if you scored high on the gender index, which were behaviors that are typical to women, but men do them as well, obviously. If you scored high on that gender index, you were 4 times as likely to return with a second heart attack. And one of those, within a year, and one of those measures was anxiety level at home on a scale of 1 to 10. And it was one of the biggest predictors of coming back with having a second heart attack. And women are under terrific stress and anxiety right now. And so I really loved hearing that message, not because women are under terrific anxiety, because that's something that we as healthcare professionals can do something about. If we're measuring those kind of things, which we aren't yet, which is part of the research to say we need to measure this stuff. If we're measuring things like that, when they come into the hospital and say, what's your level of anxiety on a scale, stress at home on a scale of 1 to 10, we can say, okay, we know that you're not going to have good health outcomes if we don't take care of this now. So start having that conversation. What do we need to do? I can't come home and take care of your kids. I can't help you clean your house. We had, as part of that gender measure, we had hours of housework. And there were women that had like 42 hours of housework on top of working full time, right? Yeah. And there were men that had lots of hours of housework too. But, start having that conversation and saying, okay, something's going to give. How do we negotiate the system we're in and the life you're in?
Doctors, we're going to be back to you in 1 minute. I want to get back to we call it the chatter box, the live chat, what everybody's saying, because they're gathering in community this morning. It's actually remarkable to see some of the issues that women are putting forward. I'm already realizing we're going to be out of time. We got 15 minutes left with our panel. Right now, quickly wanted to remind you that the team at Friesen Brothers is so proud to have their brand new location open in South Edmonton. This is the Friesen Brothers just off the Anthony Henday at Rabbit Hill Road. Just opened on March 5th. And, well, the rumor, people are telling me it's not a rumor. People are showing me photos. They say they're like, this store is like unreal. If you want to tour the store, you go, really? Like a grocery store? Is it like unreal, Ryan? They're paying you to say that. Check out my Instagram. Go to my Insta stories, right? You know, the highlights. Click on Friesen Brothers. It should be the first one you see. Might be the Real Talk beer fridge. Might actually be the first one you see because Bald Mike's beer, the sourdough beer, is now in our beer fridge. Sam, what did you think of that?
I had one yesterday. It is delish.
You like it?
I liked it.
So that's Mike Loveson. He's the COO of the company, and he worked with Troubled Monk Brewery in Red Deer. They used the Friesen Brothers sourdough starter.
That's the story behind it. Yeah,
so
I like that.
He is Bald Mike.
Okay.
And you can pick up, if you want to pick up this exclusive brew, you can find it at Friesen Brothers on the south side. They also have craft beer on tap. Anyway, you can tour the store through my Insta story, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Banjas, Smokehouse, everything else. But I told you I was going to honor Denise's request this week and not just talk about the meat and the smokehouse, because she says, Ryan, you remember there's vegans and vegetarians that listen to your show? I said, damn straight, Denise. That's why I'm reminding you. I've eaten it myself. They're Montreal smoked tofu. If tofu's your thing, you're going to love it at Friesen Brothers. Also, a big shout out to the team at Park Power for powering our Real Talk RJ hashtag at Park Power. If you go to parkpower.ca and use the promo code 2021-Real Talk, I saw a listener was just asking about that. 2021-Real Talk, $70 off your first bill. Natural gas, electricity, internet, Alberta-wide, and of course that's commercial and residential, with the team at Park Power. Our guests are Dr. Jane Schultz out of the U of A's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology in the Division of Urogynecology, Dr. Colleen Norris, a clinician scientist and professor with the U of A's Faculties of Nursing, Medicine, and School of Public Health, and Dr. Sandra Davidge, Executive Director of the Women and Children's Health Research Institute since 2012. Between the three of them, closing in on 1,000 scientific articles published. I want to get back to our live chat here. I just want to read them en masse. Doctors, jump in if you like or respond after the fact. Laurel says, can I get an amen on this pelvic floor discussion? She says, I was a runner pre-baby. I had an almost 9-pound baby. I tried running after 6 weeks. I didn't know any better. And then the comments just go, amen, amen, amen. Allison and Nicole and Terry and Karen. And Karen says, it doesn't help that pelvic floor physiotherapy is actually not covered by Alberta Health. She says, I was lucky I had supplemental insurance. I was able to access it. Karen says it changed my life.
Yeah, access to care is an issue. We have limited coverage. We have in our multidisciplinary team for some complex patients access to physio. So this is something a lot of people think that the only option is surgical, but there's certainly options for non-surgical conservative management, including pelvic floor physiotherapy. You can do yoga and Pilates because that will help, has some pelvic floor as part of it. And then there are devices called pessaries. There is medication. We work very closely with the geriatrics continence team at the Glenrose, led by Dr. Adrian Wag, and also the K Urology Center with Dr. Gary Gray, Dr. Blair St. Martin, and Dr. Lavoisier. And then we have a team of 6 urogynecologists here at the Lois Hole Hospital and our physios and nursing staff. And we can then look at surgical options if other things don't work out. But at the moment, unfortunately, due to COVID and some of the closures in hospital and in the clinic, our wait list has grown from about 1,000 women to 2,500. So we're looking at ways to navigate that with virtual care. Thankfully, we do have now the option of some virtual care and providing some education, but this is a very taboo topic. And again, this is something that our clinical research and innovation has been supported through the Women's and Children's Health Research Institute and the Lois Hole Hospital Foundation. So that's been great to allow us to develop some educational pamphlets for people in the community and for people that are immigrant women. So it's been fabulous. And we also have some Indigenous programs. We work closely with Maskwacis and some of those communities to help provide care.
I was just going to ask you, Doctor, I have a question here from a viewer that's wondering about representation, specifically of Indigenous physicians, wondering if Indigenous physicians are included in the Alberta Women's Health Foundation. But why don't let's answer that. Let's get to that. But let's also broaden the conversation. I know in particular, Dr. Schultz, that you've been a fierce advocate for access to care for Indigenous women. Let's expand that to Black and Indigenous people of color. Let's talk about trans women. Let's talk about women in particular, who are being underserved right now. What's the landscape look like, and what do we need to do about it?
So there's a lot of areas where access to care is a challenge, whether it be due to geography or ethnicity. You mentioned the Indigenous and Black and people of color. We are working to improve our equity, diversity, and inclusion as part of our department philosophy, but also part of our mandate in terms of provision of care. At the ALEC, the Royal Alexandra Hospital, we are really fortunate. We have a couple of leads in the area of women's health. One is Dr. Rebecca Rich, who is one of our obstetrician gynecologists, and Dr. Sandra Felsky-Dirksen, who is Indigenous herself, and they work as part of the Indigenous program at the ALEC. So there are steps, but there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of access to care. In terms of our transgender population, one of our physicians here, Dr. Kathy Flood, has led a program looking at pre- and post-operative care in that population, and she works with the Gender Wellness Center. So there's a lot of work to do, but we are working to try and be more inclusive and provide a broader spectrum of care. And again, that is supported through these platforms with the Alberta Women's Health Foundation and the Women's and Children's Health Research Institute.
Dr. David, go ahead, please.
Go ahead. No, okay, I'll just expand on that. Look at us. So we do need to build more in this area, and we've been having those conversations, but we do have a number of researchers that have been supported by the Alberta Women's Health Foundation to go out into the community. So that's the beauty of this Alberta Women's Health Foundation, and also the philosophy of our foundations that support us, is that we're out in the backyard, we're out in the community, and we do have researchers who work very closely with the Métis community as well as Mascot Street Chiefs, and so we do have been supporting that research area, but we are building and growing in those areas.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the three of you, just as mentioned yesterday, obviously International Women's Day, and people will be focusing on I don't want to say women's issues, that's kind of a weird way to put it, but issues impacting women through the course of this week. When we talk about representation, what are the freshmen, they don't call them freshman classes, but, the first year classes for med school, these undergraduates that are coming in, what do they look like? Is there representation of Black and Indigenous people of color? Is there equitable representation of women? You're all nodding. So,
So for the medical school admissions process, they actually have a separate Indigenous track, which is fabulous. And there is a process now looking at a pathway for there's a Black Medical Students Association looking at improving the equity diversity as part of the admissions process. So at this moment, there is an Indigenous process, both as part of the medical school admissions, but also as part of our obstetrics and gynecology admissions. So we were the first specialty group in Edmonton to pioneer a separate Indigenous pathway. So we do have Indigenous physicians that are coming in and training as women's health providers. And that's done through a specific process in conjunction with our Indigenous health team, which has been fantastic. But again, we still have a lot of work to do.
We've got a ton of viewers and listeners commenting on midwifery, on doulas, and I'm curious to know if the three of you see that as part of the continuum of care. Shalane says, I had a midwife with my third child, literally emailed the Lucina Center before I told my husband in order to secure a midwife. She went and got the midwife before she told her husband she was pregnant. That's amazing. Rhiannon says, we have no options and women are frustrated. Says, I had horrible postpartum depression after my fourth baby, and that led me to become a doula 9 years ago, says Rhiannon. These issues are close to my heart. Is this on your radar, doctors?
Yeah, so for midwifery, they're definitely part of our care team. So they're part of our executive leadership group. So through COVID, we've actually been meeting very regularly. So I work very closely with Dr. Hajra Daniel, who is our interim zone clinical lead for women's health. And we have it has been actually twice weekly calls with all the facility directors for women's health and the AHS executive, but midwifery are part of that. So we work very closely with midwifery in terms of care provision, but I very much acknowledge there are still gaps in care, challenges in accessing care, and especially it was alluded to with the mental health component. That is still a real deficiency that we will lobby and advocate for with government and Alberta Health Services and Alberta Health.
Dr. Norris, you looked like you wanted to say something.
I did, because one of the things that's going on with this is actually recognizing biases as it's not just medical students. Obviously, it's all healthcare, nursing students, it's occupational therapists. But one of the things in the book that you were mentioning, Invisible Woman, they talk about the New York Philharmonic and that women couldn't get on the New York Philharmonic in auditions. And they decided to put up a screen so that the people who were doing the auditions couldn't be seen by the people that were deciding who went on the New York Philharmonic. And lo and behold, now they're up to 50% women when they didn't see that it was a woman. And one of the things that every clinical person is taught, nursing, medicine, whatever, is when they walk into a room, they say, the first note you'll make is 55-year-old woman, or you make comments about that. And I think all of us have to step back and say, okay, what are my biases because I'm seeing this woman in front of me. And I think it would be the coolest study that we could do for medical students and nursing students is to just tell them, you have a 55-year-old with this, and this, and not tell them the sex or the gender in that fact, and see how would you go on with your treatment on this? And just so that people recognize that, oh boy, I really want to know if it's a woman. Well, why do you want to know if it's a woman? Well, because if it was a man, then this is what I do. Okay, you're answering the big question, right? That bias that all of us has. I mean, we all have different biases. It would be silly to ignore it, but we really need to pay attention to it in healthcare so that we're looking at the person who is sitting in front of us, not the sex.
Yeah, well said. There are some great questions here that I want to make sure we get to. We have just 3 minutes left. So let me circle back, because there was the assertion made that women have a higher percentage of immature red blood cells, which could affect their response to vaccines. Everybody's focusing on vaccines right now, the COVID-19 vaccine, obviously. Are any of the three of you in a position to comment on that or provide some insight? I know it'll be top of mind for a lot of our listeners.
I can take this one. This is still discovery. Oh, yeah. This is still a discovery phase of one of our researchers that we have funded through the Women and Children's Health Research Institute. But it really does highlight that COVID has a difference in how it approaches relative to sex and gender. So there's some physical differences. Potentially, these young, immature red blood cells may affect the response to vaccine. You also have women who have COVID during pregnancy may present with more severe illness. And you have seen the social and the gendered issues of more frontline workers being women and or affected by loss of jobs or more demand both at the home front and the work life. So you definitely see gendered and sex differences, as Colleen has described, relative to COVID response. And we just need to know that. We need to actually recognize that and be able to do more to be able to respond effectively with that.
I want to ask you about the comments. Just here it is from Emma. She says, is there anything being done to address racism in healthcare? Emma says, I shared a recovery room with an Indigenous mother, and the nurses treated her differently. One even made racist comments about her to me. Is this on your radar, doctors?
Absolutely. And I'm really sorry that happened. That is not acceptable. So there is now definitely sensitivity training, Indigenous awareness training, cultural sensitivity training, and those types of things being incorporated both as on the Alberta Health Services side and also on the university side. So our dean, Dr. Brenda Hemmelgarn, who was new a year ago and has done an amazing job at leading our faculty through COVID, has very much focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and has set up task forces to improve the focus on anti-racism and biases and those types of things. She has a working group that are providing some professional development on that. And certainly as part of any hiring or interview processes now, there is anyone involved in that needs to take bias assessment tools. So like through the Harvard, there's an implicit bias assessment for both gender and race, so that you're aware of those biases yourself. Because as was mentioned, we all have inherent biases, but it is something we're working towards and a work in progress. But I very much apologize for that experience. I mean, that's awful and should not happen.
We've got a great question here from Kathy, and I don't know, maybe Kathy's part of that, what do they call them, the sandwich generation, where they're looking after their kids and they're looking after their parents and trying to make time to look after themselves. And Kathy wonders, could you please ask the doctors how I can advocate for my elderly mom when I'm no longer allowed into her medical appointment? I don't know if that's COVID related or otherwise, but when it comes to health advocacy, and we'll wrap on this, doctors, maybe I'll put it to you first, Dr. Davidge. What would you suggest?
I think that's great that she is there to support her elderly family and that she is there to advocate. So I'd say keep advocating, keep working towards that. And the healthcare, I mean, I think we've been a little bit negative on the healthcare. The healthcare people are really trying. It's just about really opening up and giving more knowledge. So I would just say my advice was to keep working towards working with the healthcare providers for the elderly mom and the mental health status of these. I think we're all seeing that with our parents, and it's a tough time, but to keep working with the healthcare people in her care.
Dorothy followed up on our comment about healthcare for the LGBTQ2S plus community, including trans women. Dorothy says, dealing with the medical community or interacting with the community as a transgender person can be tricky. My child identifies as trans, and having to dance between biological sex and gender and name changes, it can be very difficult. That from Dorothy. I mean, let me just say, we're already here at 10 o'clock and you have patience to see, you have appointments. I know we could stay here for another 3 hours and do our part to try to address and identify some of the world's problems before we can start solving them. But doctors, let me simply say, I'm grateful for your time today. This hour has flown by. Our audience is grateful for it by the overwhelming number of comments that we're seeing. We want to direct people to the hashtag refocus the research. And perhaps most importantly, and here, Sam, let me put the website up so people can take a look at it. This is the Alberta Women's Health Foundation at albertawomenshealthfoundation.org. You can learn more about their researchers, what they're doing. You can learn about their research projects and how you can help make a difference. Our thanks to Dr. Sandra Davidge, Dr. Colleen Norris, and Dr. Jane Schultz. Thank you for this.
That was fun. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having us. That was awesome.
Yeah, you bet. I'll tell you, Real Talkers, in any different day, and Sam, you know this too, we'd be able to have these doctors here in studio. The studio was built to accommodate these types of roundtables, and you get the sense that the interaction between these three physicians would be pretty great.
Look at how great it would be if we had everybody in here.
We were covering a lot of ground there, and I wanted to note that one of the doctors at the end said, we've been kind of hard on the healthcare system here. And that is true in the sense that people are identifying issues, and in some cases systemic issues. Some of them are anecdotal, stories. Someone says this happened to me, or this happened to somebody I know. And then there are the real problems and the discrepancies and the deficiencies that are identified by the experts. I mean, who knew? I bet you a lot of you women that are listening to this, either live or later, are going to say, well, we knew. We knew about a lot of this, and that is true. And we're grateful that this platform can be home to some of these conversations. But who knew that there was such a deficiency in research? Who knew that women were much more likely to experience, for example, depression or to have vaccine issues with a vaccine, poor reactions to a vaccine? Who knew that 15 times more women die from heart disease than breast cancer? 15 times. And that women's heart attacks present differently than men's. Did you know that, Sam? I feel like if anybody here in the studio knew that, it's going to be you.
I knew about the heart attacks. I didn't know about a whole lot of the statistics, but I did know about the heart attacks. I actually want to circle back to something that came up on the chatter box. Eric mentioned this, and it was already going to be my plug after this. But one of my absolute favorite podcasts called 99% Invisible does an episode where they do a deep dive on the book Invisible Women. And they talk about, not only just things like access to healthcare, but also things like prioritizing clearing snow on roads versus sidewalks absolutely disproportionately affects women for the most part.
Yeah.
And there's little things all over our society that you don't realize were made for women. Seatbelts. We all get into cars and we strap on a belt that's made for men. It's made for a man's body. Right. And for years and years and years and years and years, the way that women's bodies were studied is they would use a stand-in for they basically use a smaller men's body and say, well, that's a woman.
Yeah.
And that's not at all how this research should be happening. So based on the book Invisible Women, I'm highly going to plug the episode of 99% Invisible that covers it. It's a fascinating deep dive for
Good
sure.
stuff. After you've listened to all the Real Talk podcasts, and there are none left, then you can go listen to that podcast, right? I want to get to, and many of you, when I said you women, I said you already knew it. All of you you're writing in, Jacqueline and Terry and Hope, and you're all going, yeah, we knew. Rhiannon says we do have amazing healthcare providers. We just need more. Let me clarify again. I feel like I say this almost every day, but because we're critical of an institution or because we're doing a deep dive into issues, identifying problems that we face as a society, as communities, it doesn't mean that we're inherently opposed to the institution, right? This is what some politicians can't wrap their minds around, for example. It's why you'll never see Premier Jason Kenney on this show, because Jason Kenney does not like deep dive conversations where we sink our teeth in and really get to the heart, the crux of something. He doesn't like criticism. He sees it as defiance. He will bully his way out of that type of situation. He won't make himself available for these types of vulnerable conversations. When we talk about religion, Pastor Greg Hohalter, how fabulous was he last week? I don't attend his church. I'm not a congregant, but boy, oh boy, did I feel a connection with him. He said, we as Christian leaders, we keep stepping in it. And he did an insightful look. He looked in the mirror with all of us along for the ride, along for that conversation. not an inherent attack on Christianity or religion. Same with this. I mean, healthcare workers. Who deserves more of our praise, more of our admiration, more of our support than healthcare workers right now? Right? Arguably nobody. Now you're going to come up with somebody. You know, my son's in Afghanistan. Right? Okay, yeah, 100%. But the point is, our healthcare workers have done an amazing job. You know, I hear of people that have set up sanitation stations in their garages and they have to gear down to a towel on their way back from work so they can hug their kids when they get in the house. Other healthcare workers are saying they haven't meaningfully hugged their kids or interacted with their spouses because they've been so aware of what they might be bringing home from the COVID ward where they work. We have immense respect for healthcare workers. That does not mean, though, that there may not be racism or misogyny or discrimination or shortcomings in funding or, right? Or it's why we have these conversations so we can be better. We are, Sam, we make a promise to our audience, and our audience, I know, makes the same commitment to us when they show up every single day to be inherently and perpetually curious.
Yeah, I would also just say, you know, any institution worth following is self-critical. You know what I mean? It's if people just sort of like threw their hands up in the air and said, well, we're doing a good job, there's nothing to fix here, you'd be a very ineffective person. So the fact that we have 4 doctors come on and say, hey, there's problems in our own profession, that speaks volumes. That actually moves the conversation in the direction where it should be going.
Yeah.
I decry anybody that actually won't be willing to look at themselves and say, what can I be doing differently before they start throwing stones at everybody else?
Totally. And I love this comment here from Scott who says it's possible to love something and want to see it better.
Yes.
Right? Scott nailed it. I mean, I'm not trying to twist this into a political conversation. But, you know, we see this narrative. We've talked about it before when people that are critical, for example, of the Alberta government will be spun as anti-Alberta. Hell no. Nothing could be further from the truth, right? It's possible to love something and want to see it better. I feel like we should steal Scott's comment and use it as our strapline for all of our marketing. I feel like Scott just kind of summed up the entire premise of this show in one sentence. Linda Ray is calling you Sam the Renaissance Man. Are you going to be Uncle Sam? Are you going to be Sam the Renaissance Man? I mean, what are we going to... We're going to have... Maybe you would just roll with multiple...
The thing is, as I pointed out before, you can't assign your own nickname. So I'm a little bit at the mercy of Real Talkers.
Is there one
right
that
now.
you prefer? I mean, Uncle Sam
Uncle Sam is practical because I have a new niece whom I finally met, actually. And she is adorable. Oh, yes. But we'll put that aside anyway. So, but Sam the Renaissance Man. I mean, I don't think I've ever been described as a Renaissance man before.
You definitely can't call yourself that.
No,
because that's so self-serving. That would lack modesty, as they would say. You know.
Well, you wouldn't be much of a Renaissance man if you lacked modesty. See, I mean, this one it's a trap right in and of itself.
This guy just keeps nailing it. I encourage you. We don't have time to read. Troy says that's why my favorite line in a movie. He doesn't say what movie it is. Shoot, maybe we'll turn this into a contest. Troy says, that's why my favorite line in a movie is, quote, I love this country. I owe it everything. That's precisely why I can criticize it, why I must. I love that. We're going to get to some of your emails in just a moment. I wanted to remind you that the team at McBain Camera is Alberta's best destination for photographers and content creators. And they encourage you to tell your story beautifully with the Nikon Z50 camera. Stunning 4K ultra high def with 1080p slow motion time-lapse mode and so much more. You're a time-lapse photographer yourself, Sam.
Love time-lapse. Oh, yeah.
How big of a deal is 4K ultra HD with 1080p slow motion time-lapse mode?
It's huge. Oh, yeah.
They've got the...
time lapses are they're very complicated to do right, and anytime you have some technology that kind of helps you along with that, it's just the biggest time saver.
As a matter of fact, we're going to see an example of your skilled time-lapse photography when we wrap the show.
Correct. Yeah.
Coming up in who knows how many minutes. So keep a keen eye on our extra, we call it, as we go to black. You'll see some of Sam's amazing work on that pedestrian footbridge. I'm trying to. That's not the one that got torn down over the North Saskatchewan to make way for the LRT.
No, that is the one from Horlack to Laurier Park.
Oh, there you go, Horlack to Laurier Park. You can download Nikon's webcam utility. Remember, we're doing a read for McBain Camera right now. I just about forgot. We're so excited. You can live stream from Zoom, Twitch, YouTube, and more like a pro. Why not look good on your new project out of the gates? When you order a Nikon Z50 body or a kit at McBainCamera.com. You can enter the promo code REALTALK, just one word, REALTALK, at checkout, and they'll give you a free ProMaster Hitchhiker tabletop tripod with your order, plus McBain's knowledgeable staff ready to help you with all your questions. Wanted to give a shout out as well. Speaking of help and support, the team at Westworld Computers is ready to hook you up right now. Now, whether it's new, you're taking a look at the Apple lineup and you're going, boy, that new iMac, that new MacBook Pro that Jesmo's using looks incredible. That 16-inch, incredible. Yeah, they got those. But if you're looking for maybe dialing back your budget, you want something that's been gently used, refurbished, it's got all the software reloaded, and it comes with a warranty, they can do that for you too at a discounted price at Westworld Computers. Plus, there's the team at Eden Landscaping. They're getting ready to go for a busy spring, and you don't want to miss the boat on this one. Looks like it's going to be another laid-back summer, probably not as much traveling as most people think. Why not make that dream come true? You've been looking out your front or your backyard. You're envisioning like one of those sort of interlocking stone fire pits, or maybe one of those swim spas, maybe a barbecue station or an outdoor kitchen. Maybe you want to be fancy like our in-studio Renaissance man and put in a pergola or a pergola. Either one. They can do both pergolas and pergolas. Check out the work that they do at landscapeedmonton.com. That's Eden Landscaping, a proud partner of Real Talk. You see this email from Manit that came in? This was an interesting one on the heels of our show on International Women's Day yesterday. You can email us anytime to talk at ryanjesperson.com. Manit says, I was listening, Ryan, to yesterday's show. That the email came in at about 2 a.m, and I saw it live because I never sleep. And Manit said, I was actually, for the first time ever in listening to the Real Talk podcast, I came across a moment where I had to stop listening to reflect on something a guest said, because it actually made me feel very uncomfortable. One of your guests yesterday opened her appearance on the show by saying, quote, Gandhi said the world will be saved by the Western woman. Manit says, I actually had to go back and double check that's what she said, and I thought I surely must have misheard, since I'm a little bit high right now, which is cool. After confirming that I had not misheard, I Googled the quote, and I discovered that it was actually the Dalai Lama who said those words at the Vancouver Peace Summit in September of 2009. I understand the intent of the Dalai Lama's words was likely to provoke privileged women to speak out on behalf of other marginalized communities, but Western to most people means white. A white woman using this quote made me instantly think of the white savior complex, and it made me feel super uneasy. Women in the Eastern world are also saving the world. You know, for example, in India, women are joining and even leading the farmers' protests that have been going on for more than 100 days now in Delhi, and for even longer in my motherland of Punjab. If anybody knows Indian society and culture, they understand how patriarchal it is, which is why this story is so powerful and so inspiring. This is, as a matter of fact, Time Magazine's latest international edition featured the story on their cover, and Real Talkers should check it out. Manit says, anyway, I'm not sure if I'm the only one who had this reaction, but as a woman of color, it once again affirmed the need for intersectionality in feminism. The advancement of women is not just for white women, but for all women. Thanks for the great guests. I'm going to go back to finishing Monday's show. That from Manit, who sent us an email. I thought that was great.
Yeah,
Talk at ryanjesperson.com. Yeah. Thoughtful.
Very thoughtful.
And again, not ripping the show, not ripping the segment, but saying, hey, we need to be better on this, or... You know, this is something where, Sam, feedback like this from an audience member or from multiple audience members. Terry right now is saying, I'm so glad something was said there. The quote did bug me. These are the types of things that can drive our editorial process.
Yeah.
Right? And
it
put things on our radar.
Better.
Makes the show better. I love this from Robert. He sent this in on International Women's Day. And Robert, we ran out of time, but I wanted to read it. For hockey fans, Robert says, I know that not everybody's a hockey fan, but they may not know the name Cassie Campbell. He says, but every time she does a game, she calls a game. She's a broadcaster on Hockey Night in Canada. He says, my Twitter feed fills up with all these terrible, demeaning messages about her and her skills as a broadcaster. He says, I'm curious how many gold medal winning hockey teams the critics have captained. Cassie's a Hall of Famer and one of Canada. She's one of the history's greatest all-time players, and certainly one of the greatest all-time in Canada, if not the. He says, how many of you have had to provide commentary on the spot with no script? He says, complaints aren't new in sports. They happen all the time. But what I find most surprising are these individuals, a lot of them that claim to be woke, they claim to support women, they claim to advocate for equality. They seem to set all this aside the minute the puck drops. Is our beloved game of hockey a bridge too far? Wonders Robert. He says, if any of you ever wondered where and how online bullying starts in schools, take a long, hard look in the mirror. This is the same thing. He says people ratchet it up and it's become acceptable to denigrate another person. He says, I bet you a lot of people are saying these things because it's the norm. They want to fit in. Robert says, I don't know Cassie personally, but I happen to know that, he says she's doing what she can to talk about what she knows. And he says, and every time I see her, she appears to become better at her job. Robert, I could go off about how athletes are not inherently great broadcasters and how we give a lot of slack to a lot of athletes that come into broadcasting to get better, don't we? We work with them. We cheer them on. That hasn't always seemed to be the case with Cassie Campbell or Jennifer Botterill or any of the other women, Sarah Nurse, that you see more and more of them that are popping up on hockey broadcasts. He says, to those that would disagree with me, imagine if she was your mom or your wife or your daughter and people were saying all this stuff about her. What behaviors are we modeling to our kids? Says Robert, we are capable of being so much better than this. Really appreciate that from Robert.
I got to jump on a little thing that he said at the end there. It bothers me every time we talk about some sort of a woman's issue, and I'm going to say that very broadly, that people immediately default to the think about if it was your mom or your wife or your daughter. No, just think of it as like a person in your life. Like I don't understand.
That's the same thing. That's the same thing.
Yeah, well, but like I don't understand why people need that personal connection to value somebody. You know what I mean?
Because you have to make something relevant to people. Like when people this morning to Shannon Phillips, there are a lot of people that are not going to care that Shannon Phillips is being surveilled by Lethbridge Police because they too will not vote for the NDP and they can't stand that Shannon Phillips is an outspoken and confident woman. But if you say, what if police were surveilling you because you are Mormon? Or what if police are surveilling you because you voted for the Alberta Party? Or what if police are surveilling you because you spoke out against Alberta beef? Then it all of a sudden, the light bulb goes on in people's brains. I think that's why you do it. You have to make things relevant to a lot, not to everybody. I mean, there are altruistic people out there that are, if they see injustice wherever it is, they will fight against it and fight for the marginalized. But that's not the case with everybody, I don't think.
Yeah, it just, the thing that bothers me, you're right. I think that, storytelling is about making things relevant and making things relatable. And I think you're absolutely right on that point. I just know that these comparisons are very, very, very one-sided. Nobody ever looks at somebody who is a man who's having a hard time. Let's say a male athlete that becomes a broadcaster and say, hey, imagine that was your dad or your brother. Nobody makes that comparison.
Lola Zaz says, hey, sports fans knock all sports commentators. It's not gender specific. There is something about Cassie Campbell. Like there's something about the criticism she faces in particular. I've seen it. Again, it's anecdotal. And I do acknowledge that people rip all sports. I mean, like play-by-play guys get crucified. But there seems to be something about Cassie. And I can't. I mean, some of you are probably screaming right now at your speakers as you listen to this. But to me, my impression is that it's because she's a woman. And it bugs a lot of hockey fans. It bugs a lot of men that a woman is doing color commentary during the game.
It bothers them because she's smarter than them.
Well, maybe a better hockey, not maybe.
Also a better hockey player. She is a better hockey player than everybody that's watching her.
I guarantee she is a better hockey player than you. I don't care who you are. I mean, unless Connor and Leon are watching, she is a better hockey player than you. It's been an amazing show today. Before we go, we wanted to remind you that the teams at Dairy Queen of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, we're so proud to partner with them. One of you wrote in the other day and said, which one? You said you always say Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Where are they? I said, Y Gardens, Baseline Road. That's Mike. And then Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, and Westmount. That's Mark. And both of them are big backers of the show. They wanted me to remind you that every night of the week, it's 2 for $5 treat night. That means 7 days a week after 8 p.m., you can mix and match any 2 medium dipped cones and sundaes for $5. $5. Now make me a promise when you're there, you're going to let them know you're a real talker. They love knowing that their investment's paying off. Would you be a dipped cone guy or a sundae guy, Sam?
Out of the choice, probably a dipped cone.
What do you like about the dipped cone?
It's simple. It's so simple. It's not trying to be anything that it's not. It's soft serve and crunchy, delicious chocolate.
I love how it's got when you first crack the surface, like when you first, like, you know, when water's just starting to freeze, like just in the fall, and you just, and then all of a sudden it all cracks apart. For me, it's that delicate chocolate covering. Oh boy. The team at Local Waste is proud to present Trash Talk each and every Friday here on the show. You can send in your gripes, your rants, and your raves to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Also want to remind you that for more than a quarter century, they've been locally owned and operating in the province of Alberta into BC. They're looking to expand their operations with business partners that may see an opportunity in their community to go up head-to-head against the big international garbage corporations. If you're looking for a solution that fits you and you love to talk trash and save money, check out the team at Local Waste by following the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Same deal with Alta Moving and Storage. If this spring means a move for you, take away the stress and give the team at Alta Moving and Storage a call. They've got, first of all, these frog boxes, the eco-friendly moving boxes. You borrow them as opposed to having to go to the liquor store and source out like 35 boxes that had Smirnoff bottles to hold all of Grandma's fine china. Not a good plan. The frog box is. Plus, the pod-style moving containers allow you to move at your pace and take the stress out of the mix. Plus, long and short-term storage solutions at Alta Moving and Storage. You can find them online at altastorage.ca. We're very much looking forward to tomorrow's show. We want to give you a heads up. If you're a mom or a dad, you're a grandparent, you're a care provider, you may be interacting with the justice system. We know that there are deficiencies here in so many ways as there are in healthcare. That's why we're bringing in 3 experts for a family law roundtable. On Thursday, we're talking about bias in universities. And on Friday, alternative energy with our solar panel. All of that to come right here on Real Talk. Thanks for joining us weekday mornings. We'll talk to you soon.